Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Little Twang, and that's right, we're at episode 2, season 3. Now, today promises to be an interesting conversation that we've all kind of wanted to have for a while, and we haven't done it just because we didn't have the right people. But look no further, we have someone on our panel today that's going to educate us and also entertain us for a bit. But before getting to that, let's check in with Shads. Shads, how was your week?
It's been great. Just another day living that beautiful global pandemic life.
Mm-hmm.
Another lockdown is here. Pretty sure we're already in a lockdown, but that's a conversation for another day.
Mm-hmm.
Life is great. Can't complain. COVID free, social distancing,
I love
love
that
and
you like
life.
to say COVID free as if the people who got COVID are supposed to feel guilty.
No, I'm just like thankful because I refuse to do that test. So I am doing everything in my power to avoid having to do that test. I can't be the
I'm
only one.
I'm wishing you luck with that. I'm definitely wishing you luck with being COVID free for the rest of 2021. If we could all be so lucky.
What about you? How have you been, sir?
I'm tired, but I'm here and I get to have a conversation with someone I met about a year ago and she is amazing. So let me just check in with her. She's smiling, she's beautiful, and she's Guyanese. Hey, Alana.
Hi.
So we're here to have a conversation on inclusion, diversity, equity, and everything that has to do with that particular thing. But why are you the perfect person apart from being Guyanese, being of mixed heritage? Why is Alana the perfect person for this conversation today?
I don't know. It's so funny when you said the first time you met me was a year ago. Maybe I'm the perfect person because you met me when I was interrupting a phone call that you were having with somebody, so I could preach to you about diversity and
And
inclusion.
you still call me Scarborough.
Yes, yes. You need to remember people properly. You need distinctive features and character.
I feel
Huh.
like when you call me Scarborough, I feel like a side chick. You know when like in a man's phone, you're like
Only
Shorty from
you.
Scarborough.
No, no, it's not like that. It's endearing.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. It's more because Lori, our mutual friend, she has too many friends. So at the time when I was trying to learn the names of all of her friends, it was easier back then.
That's
It
fair.
She's a
works.
socialite. She's gonna watch this. Lori, you're a socialite.
Perfect. So, Alana, tell us what you do right now.
So I am an advisor in equity, diversity, and inclusion, and I am the person responsible for official languages at the National Research Council of Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So my main portfolios are to work with racialized employees, and I have a bit of the Indigenous portfolio as well, and all the official languages for the organization. So all of the regulations that we have to follow, that kind of falls under my purview, like to give advice about how to follow those rules or address complaints that happen, things like that.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow. I like that. I like that. So, thank you for being here. But I did tell you in the pre-interview that we were going to
Hmm.
play a game.
Oh
And
yes.
so when it's a Jamaican, we say keep your yardie card, but I'm not Guyanese and I can't dictate what it means to keep your Guyanese card, but I'm going to call it your West Indian card today. Now,
Okay.
two questions because you specifically said, just in case you missed the first one, you need to make it up, you need to keep the West Indian card,
Redemption.
right? So,
Yes. I need good grades.
definitely, we're Caribbean and that's a thing. We need the good
You need
grades.
good grades. Yes.
Okay, so this performer hails from GT and his name is Mortimer Softly. Someone,
Is a performer.
yes, someone
The
cued.
only what kind of music?
If I tell you the type of music, you're gonna get it.
The only
It's not chutney.
performer
It's not chutney.
like natural black? Like, I don't know. That's the only person I know from Guyana.
That's correct. That's correct, guys. She got it right. She got it right. She got
Yay.
the first question right. Now, she kind of guessed it. Like, do you agree, Sean? She kind of guessed the rest. Like,
Yes, she
that's
did.
all
That
that,
was like,
right?
I'm not too sure, but
That's why I said it wasn't chutney. So, if your mom sent you to the store to purchase
Mhm.
Banga Mary, what is she sending you to buy?
Bangamarys fish, please.
Okay, okay.
Please.
she's like, do not insult my Guyanese-ness.
Butterfish is my favorite. Bangamary might be second.
Okay, okay. And there you have it, folks. She got it right. She got both of them right. So you get to keep your West Indian card. So thank you.
Yay.
Thanks.
I love that. I love that. That was a fun session. Now, before we get into the actual discussion, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. So we're back, and today's discussion is about diversity and inclusion, and we're here with Shads and Alana. Now, before getting into like the conversation with Shads, we're gonna go to Alana. And Alana, you mentioned something in your introduction where you said diversity, inclusion, and equity. And to be totally honest with you, until I watched a TED talk online, equity to me it seemed far removed from the diversity and inclusion conversation. Why is it
Mhm.
within the last 2 years that equity is now a part of the conversation, and what is equity?
So, equity, at least in the Canadian context,
Mm-hmm.
and probably in the government context. And I should preface this and this entire conversation with nothing I say during this conversation reflects in any way, shape, or form any opinions or thoughts from the government of Canada.
Yes,
They are my own. Okay.
gotta add
Just
that
so you know,
disclaimer.
that's very important for me to say. Okay. No public servant hat. So, but the equity term, so in the case of government, I would say, especially, and maybe, big corporations looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion, that term would specifically come from the Employment Equity Act
Mm-hmm.
that we have in Canada. And so the Employment Equity Act talks about four equity seeking groups, one being visible minorities, which, a better term is racialized persons or, racialized people, um, Indigenous peoples, women, and persons with disabilities. So those are the four groups that, in this legislation, they determined that they had less advantages than other people in jobs,
Right.
and so they designed this act to basically make sure that these people were given equitable rights and treatment when they're in the workplace. So that's for me where the equity term would come from, along with diversity and inclusion.
Okay. So when we're having conversations about diversity and inclusion, let's say I'm a multi-million dollar multinational company, and I've employed indigenous people, women, people with disabilities, and racialized people. Is that not enough? Like, do I not meet the requirements of what it means to be an employer within this space, which is equal opportunity, or no?
Um, on paper, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
So there's what's called the workforce market availability and the labor market availability, and those are essentially quotas that are calculated about how much representation companies should or the government should have. So that's what people look at when they're looking at representation by numbers.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you go deeper, and so that's like on paper, oh yeah, we have people, we have these percentages. On paper, then you have to look at things like, okay, when you have those equity seeking groups and you have them with intersections. So not only is a person a woman, but she's a black woman with a visible or with an invisible disability, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Is she in the same position around the senior executive table? Are there any racialized persons? Are there any indigenous people? Or are the indigenous people all at the level 1 level of employment? So that's where the equity part comes in, right? Diversity is one thing, you can see it in numbers.
Right.
Inclusion is another thing. When you do employee satisfaction surveys, do employees feel satisfied to be there? There's often a question about, do you think about leaving your organization, or do you foresee yourself leaving your organization in how much time?
Hmm.
Does your manager support you? So employee satisfaction will show you kind of results of inclusion. Diversity, sure, in the numbers, right? And then equity will be more, how are these people placed in the organization? Are they placed in a place where they can lead and drive conversations and positively affect conversations?
Right.
Or are they just, there as a number, a
Yeah.
token?
Oh
Interesting.
yeah.
I actually love that. The fact that you were able to break everything down for us and explain, because to a lot of people, diversity and inclusion is this big business thing, and once the numbers are met, then they assume that there's no other concern. People have said it's basically like we're sorry for the bad things that we've done. Um, so that's why the department exists. But
Hmm.
I won't necessarily get into that. But I
I think
want
it's to appease angry racialized peoples,
Yeah,
and
I
people
feel
who
the
are no
interesting.
same way.
longer accepting foolishness.
I agree. I feel the same way about it. It's just for
In-
show.
Hmm.
Interesting. Now, Shads, you've been in the workplace, and one of the words that I like to use is intersectionality. You're black and female.
Woman.
Um, um,
I'm
sorry.
black and I'm a woman.
Okay, you're black and a woman. My apologies. Please don't hold that against me.
I won't.
Um, what is that like? I know you work for you were employed to a larger company, and
Yes.
a
One
part of
of.
it was being a diverse space. But when we think about diversity, did you feel included in the conversations? What were some of the activities that took place at work that made you feel included as a woman of color?
I mean, to be honest, I didn't participate in a lot of them because I just didn't really feel like it. But I was definitely aware of it. The company that I work for, I can't disclose
Right.
who it was, but it is one of Canada's top companies,
Mm-hmm.
um, highly reputable. And they definitely before I'll give them their credit, like before all of what's been happening has been going on, they've always gone out of their way to create diversity, inclusion, and equity. So they had events where there's like international day, so it's different countries. So it wasn't that, okay, well, I'm from this country, so I have to have a booth representing that country. I
Hmm.
could go and
Mm-hmm.
pick another country, and it will give me the chance to learn about that country and speak on it. Of course, they'll have people contribute to that booth who are actually from that country. Of course, a
Right.
lot of people tend to go to the Jamaica booth because almost everyone knows Jamaica,
Is it
regardless
the
of.
jerk chicken? I feel like it's a jerk
It's
chicken
the
though.
jerk chicken and the patties. That was definitely definitely was pulling a lot of people. But yeah, like they also had um their pride events. You'll get constant emails, like the communication emails, like whoever's in the communication department,
Right.
like kudos to them. They're always sending emails, keeping people up to date about everything when it comes to diversity. There are questionnaires that will go out. There are events. They will have people come in and have speakers talk about certain things and their shared experiences. They had someone from CNN speak. They had athletes. They have like a lot of people, influential people as well. So they definitely didn't shy away from that. And again, I don't know if it's because of like their who they are in Canada, but
Right.
regardless, they were doing it. And I don't think anyone as an employee there could say that they don't care
And they
or
didn't
don't
feel
like or they
included.
didn't feel
Right.
included because they always made sure it's just a matter of like who actually wanted to participate, and
And
participation actually was successful. I'll give them that. A lot of people do participate.
I love that you said that your employer did like a lot of the work prior to March of 2020, because I felt like in March of 2020 a lot of companies, like friends in different organizations, would say, oh, you know what, we're having these discussions, we're doing this, we're doing that. It seems like diversity and inclusion was basically a way for us to do a culture share, but then we didn't have real conversations around what diversity,
Prior.
inclusion, and
Yeah.
equity looked like. So kudos to wherever you worked, that was actually doing the work long before there was a need to actually have these discussions. So
Yeah.
kudos
And
to them.
when what happened last year happened, oh, trust and believe they were sending communications out. The conversations were ramped up even more. They
Wow.
were checking in to see how people felt. They were actually even like, if you don't feel like working, it is okay to
Wow.
step back, especially in the midst of a pandemic. That was just like a lot. Like, um, and they are global. They're not just in Canada. Like they are based in the U.S., so they're definitely affected there. They're based in the Caribbean and in Asia and Europe.
It's
So
it's the emotional intelligence for me.
I'll definitely
That's
give them that. Yeah.
honestly. But I love that you made mention of that. No, I want to switch gears and go back to Alana. So many times when we have this diversity and inclusion conversation, a couple of people either aren't included in the conversation, or I don't know if they don't show up or they're just not invited to the conversation. A lot of times when we think about diversity and inclusion, we think of brown people, black people, non people of color. But sometimes I feel like indigenous people are not included in that conversation. Is there a reason for that?
Hmm.
Well, um, how do I how do I put this? Um, and my one of the things I've noticed in Canada is that hate hath no fury, like the white Canadian for an Indigenous person.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Um, Even more than black people. You think
Mm-hmm.
black people in Canada, Indigenous people, Canada as a country, in terms of covert racism, their way of oppressing and literally erasing Indigenous people is studied all around the country.
That part.
So I'll
Wow.
give you, for example, the apartheid. There is documented proof that diplomats from South Africa visited Canada and the Canadian government to study their Indian residential school system to base the apartheid off of it.
Yep.
Also, Canada
Wow.
called the residential school system the final solution before Hitler did.
Yep.
So that's also in speculation, but they don't have proper documents to prove it. So, why it is that they're not invited to the conversation? Well, Canadians haven't been socialized to invite them to the conversation. For
Hmm.
most Canadians, they don't even exist, right? If you live
Mm-hmm.
in a part of, let's say Toronto or Montreal or
Right.
somewhere where you are very much in a metropolitan area where you don't even maybe see Indigenous peoples, they might have existed in your grade 8 textbook for like 2 pages, and then that's it. But other than that, you don't know anything about them, their history or anything like that. So there's just a lack of understanding and literally a lack of knowledge and a lack of anything like, oh, these people exist. It's almost like an afterthought for some people. Like it's incredible how little knowledge there is on the part of others towards Indigenous people. So yeah, so I think I would say that's why they're not invited to the conversation a lot of the time. Um, I think in terms of non-Indigenous allies, Black people are and should be their strongest allies.
Yes, they should be.
Wow. Like, this is a lot of information. It's a lot to unpack. Like, I was looking at Shads while you were speaking. I was like, is she okay? Because it seemed like a lot to unpack. So thank you for doing that. Because I've always felt like, when we have these discussions, we don't necessarily have the discussion around like why aren't the indigenous people a part of this particular conversation, which brings us to the model minority myth. I've had conversations with people who are considered to be model minorities, and whenever we speak about, diversity and inclusion and what anti-racism is, like they usually shy away from that particular conversation. In fact, I was told by one, I'm not a person of color. It could be that when we started talking about POCs, it initially was applicable to Black people, but when we created this collective term, a lot of people who are considered model minorities, or some people rather, they weren't really rocking with it. So is there a reason why model minorities don't necessarily, until about a couple of, let's say until last year with COVID-19 and the anti-Asian racism, that's when there were more conversations surrounding Asians and diversity and inclusion. So is that why they weren't a part of the conversation before? They didn't feel like they were part of this inclusive community?
Um, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with the fact that people of color, person of color, and black are not synonymous. Neither is person of color a euphemism for black. If somebody's black, we say they're black. They're not a
Okay.
person of color, they're black,
Thank you.
right? People of color as a group, okay, first of all, black people over history, we are the ones that have started the most movements, the most whatever, and we, and like the nice people we are, bring everybody else along.
Yes.
So, so
Choo choo.
so so black indigenous, and the indigenous do it too, black indigenous and people of color, so we brought them along, right? Everybody else, whether or not they choose to identify as a person of color, well, there's a lot of history around that, around caste systems, different stratifications of class and caste, class in places like China, caste in places like India, in terms of colorism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So the model minority myth and anything about, well, the model minority myth that you have to be good at everything, or you have to be good at certain things, or you just are, and whatever, all of these are a result and constructs created by colonialism. um, so people who might say they're not a person of color, well, it's because they tried to get as close as they could to being white as possible, because for them, white is the ultimate achievement or the place they want to be, because for them, white means, wealth, or means acceptance, or
Yep.
whatever. And when they finally, somebody calls them on it, it's almost like they forgot that they weren't white.
That
And you go,
part.
oh, you're a person of color. I'm not a person of color. What are you talking about?
Because I
Right?
feel like because they were still associating the person of color to black in their
Yeah.
minds.
Right.
Well, they're associating to that, or they just like, there are literally, like, there are brown people who don't want to be brown, or who are like so light that they're like, hey, I can pass for not brown. There are people who are convinced that they are not what they are,
It's
like, and that will erase everything, or will try to erase everything. It's like, but you're still brown. You're still eight, like you know.
right.
So yeah.
That is interesting because when we think if we should go back to the unfortunate incident that happened in Atlanta, where people were definitely affected, there were some Sikh men in it. So when we think of model minority and anti-Asian hate, um usually is it not a specific group, or do all Asians get lumped in as a model minority?
uh, uh in Canada, um other Asians can get lumped in, definitely, for different reasons. I would say, especially in like the big metropoles, right?
Yeah.
Where other Asian populations are um just as large as, let's say, the Chinese or the Korean population.
Right.
Um so yeah, for different things. I mean, growing up, and it's going to change from generation to generation as well, right? Because if you look at things like Statistics Canada, when they show you immigration patterns, they have changed over the years. So immigration patterns of, for example, black people came in between the 60s and 90s mostly.
Hmm.
The 2000s, the black people, or just black people from the Caribbean, I should say, sorry. And then from the 2000s on, it's black people from Africa that we're seeing, and from Haiti and places like that. So immigration patterns, same thing with Asians, right? Like any type of Asian, you'll see patterns in terms of different countries when
Hmm.
when immigration waves are happening to Canada and things like that. So come to the millennial generation, and, well, Asian, there's a whole lot of different types of Asian, right? And
Exactly.
so, like, you look in Toronto, well, there's Toronto has the highest number of Chinese people in specific, in the country. uh, they say Vancouver, but it's not the truth. Vancouver has the most of um, that area of the world, but not Chinese in specific.
Huh.
Toronto has the most Chinese people in the country. um, but then we also have a lot of people from Sri Lanka and from India and from Bangladesh and things like that. So when you go to school, Asian is, there's so many different people that
Representing.
yeah, that are represented that might be taking on this model minority myth. So while as before it might have just meant Chinese because of immigration patterns, now it can mean a whole bunch of different things.
Interesting. Interesting. That actually puts a lot of things into perspective. So you went to school here, Alana, and Shads did Jamaica and here. I remember going to school with Asians, and I don't think I saw them as like smarter or more likely to be successful than anybody else. I felt like in the Caribbean, it's a rat race, and everyone just had this drive to be successful. Like you just had to be the best.
Hmm.
So I don't think there was like a model minority concept. It was something I learned when I moved here to North America that Asians are deemed smarter, more successful, and the list goes on. No, Shaz,
Hmm.
that was just probably my experience. What was your experience like in going to school in Jamaica? Were your Asian schoolmates, classmates deemed smarter? Were they supposed to uh, behave in a particular way while you probably got a little bit more leeway to just be yourself?
I think because I went to a mix of like I started off in prep school and
Mm-hmm.
then I went to a high school that had a little bit more mix in terms of socioeconomic. So like in prep school, it was fairly diverse. So we did have um, Asians, be it South or East, but they're also still Jamaican at the end of the day. That's just their
Right.
backgrounds. And then we had Black people. It wasn't really seen as okay, you're expected to do better than everyone else. It was still that everyone is expected to do well regardless, because that's just what's been driven into us as Caribbean
Which
people,
is
that
true.
education is our ticket out of the country if we do plan on leaving, and if we want to be successful out there in the world, we have to be smart. So it didn't matter like what you look like. In high school, it didn't really come in the sense of like, okay, you had to be smart. I noticed like the people who were of Asian descent, they were seen as the prettier ones because of the hair and all that stuff. But they were also, I know one girl, like she was kind of picked on in the sense that people took like um, advantage of her, thinking that she was like really quiet and docile so they could push her around. And they learned the hard way, don't push people around who are quiet because they will literally like come for your life. um but nothing on the levels that I see here with that comparison expectation of Asians here. Is definitely night and day.
I love that. Not the whole fighting and the girl being deemed docile, but you brought up a point which I think leads us to the next section of the discussion, which is unconscious bias. But before we get into that, we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back.
This is What Good, brought to you by Talking Tales and hosted by storyteller Keisha Christie. Oral traditions is an integral part of who we are and preserves our culture. Join us every week as we gather and we share stories and talk culture.
And we're back. So, Shaz, you brought up the fact that, Asians were seen as a little bit more docile or prettier. And I feel like that's like an unconscious bias because there isn't necessarily any judgment or anything to support that particular claim. But there's usually a belief, I know as a Jamaican, that there's certain features that are deemed to be a little bit more pleasing to the eye, and we'll probably never accept it or admit it, but a lot of people prefer the longer hair, the lighter skin, just because of whatever biases, conscious or unconscious, that they may have. But
Thanks to
Alana,
colonialism.
you're
Hmm.
the professional here. So tell us about unconscious bias for a bit. Like, what is it, and how does it show up on a day-to-day basis in like everybody's life?
Well, first, I can say that the model minority myth is a form of unconscious bias.
Hmm.
Yep.
So it's a form of it's a message that has been uh, knitted into the very fabrics of our socialization here in Canada. Where because I can tell you, growing up in Scarborough, the model minority myth I don't want to say it wasn't a thing, but it kind of wasn't a thing in that everybody was an immigrant. Everybody was trying. My generation, all of our parents were immigrants. They were working hard for us, so we worked hard. So it was like,
Right.
if I saw, my friends playing piano or doing math, it's because they were trying to do something to be the best. If they didn't want to do it and they were forced to do it, it was because, oh, well, their parents just really wanted them to. It wasn't like, oh, because you're Asian. That came along later, but that also comes from the other. It's something that other people, put on certain on Asian people and stuff like that. It doesn't come from them, right?
Yeah,
So so unconscious bias is basically these messages that are knit into our society, and we just don't even realize it, and we perpetuate them on a daily basis, and we don't realize it. So it is an innocence in a way. So a lot of people will express things through, a microaggressions or phrases, and they won't realize from the very way in which they look at the world could be biased in certain ways. So you talked about light skin. Well, yeah, colonialism.
yeah.
Who told people light skin was prettier? Um, the darker the skin, the clearer it is. I like that they have smooth complexions, darker
I
skinned
I
people.
know, like
They
I'm
don't have
so
acne.
envious of the
I know.
even tone. Like, ugh,
Like, yeah.
Look at y'all.
So like there's things about having to be skinny, having to be a certain way. And these things also, a lot of them, colonialism is so deep and we don't even realize it. A lot of these things about image, body image, or things like that we see are put there because the white Europeans who were colonizing couldn't achieve the standards that we had.
exactly,
Because they were envious, they changed the standards to what they could
exactly,
achieve, which to make it look good.
Hmm.
exactly.
All right.
Interesting.
So why do you need to plaster all that makeup on your face? Well, if you don't have acne or anything else or imperfections, you wouldn't need to.
Yep,
But guess who needs to?
the people
Hmm.
who.
Yeah. So,
So I love that you broke that down with like model minority being like an unconscious bias. So as a person of color, can I suffer from unconscious bias, even towards people of my own race or
of course,
ethnicity?
of course,
Hmm.
nobody is safe.
Nobody's safe.
Interesting.
Nobody is safe. Nobody is void of it.
We've
Nobody
all
is
been damaged by colonialism.
But shouldn't I know
Mhm.
better though? Like, shouldn't I know
No,
better?
all my thing before
Hmm.
was I people who were overweight used to annoy me when I
Why?
was younger.
Why?
Because I was like, why can't they work out?
Oh,
I was into sports, and it's something that you see, right?
hmm,
You see it in your shows, you see it around you. You see, you have to be fit, you have to be a certain way. I don't understand why you can't work out. Well, if you're like that, did
be
I know what a
careful with
thyroid
that.
issue was at the time? Did I know that you could just be genetically bigger? No, I didn't know any of that, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
it was a bias, right? There's other biases. You know, I went to McGill University. There's biases about people going to other universities, especially when you go to an elitist university. Like
Right.
there's simple ones like that.
Yeah.
And there's other ones where yes, it comes down to race and everything too, but we can all have them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when we have conversation about biases, a lot of people are like, oh, me, no, I'm fair. Like, no, me, I'm not racist. I don't see color. I think all genders are important. Like,
Like,
those are usually the rebuttals for unconscious bias or any form of bias in
Hmm.
general.
So
even
But
that's the
as simple as
colorblind.
somebody's name, people have
Hmm.
their unconscious biases. Like, you look at
Hmm.
someone's name and you immediately judge them, because, oh, you have that name, you must be
Hmm.
like that.
which
And I
which is
mean,
true. Which
we
is
could use the
true.
word Karen, for example, like, if you want to.
Wow, you
Like,
went there.
I
And
mean,
that was one that was created in just the last year, right?
yeah,
Year or two, right?
yeah.
So
Everyone is a Becky with straight hair, no thanks to
yeah,
Beyonce.
pop
Everyone.
culture does it. Yeah.
So,
Wow.
like, age is also an up there as your unconscious bias. People who see young people think that young people are all lazy. Like, our
Hmm.
entire generation has been labeled as lazy, and we
Hmm.
want everything handed to us. And
Hmm.
it's like, no, we don't. There are
You
literally
know what's a
people
good
in
place to
our
look at it? when you look at what type of people you like to date, then the
Huh.
biases
But
come
wait,
flying out.
so is that an unconscious bias or is that a preference? Because I know a
That's
lot of
another,
people
yeah.
like
Well,
they flip flop between preference, fetish, and unconscious bias.
Yeah.
Which is
Or
it?
conscious sometimes.
it,
Or
it might be conscious,
Yeah.
honestly, because I have preferences, and I'm like, I can't.
you don't have to share.
I've had like for example, I'm
I am
like
now
one of my
intrigued.
preferences is like I don't want to date a West Indian man ever
And
because
I'm
I
with
feel like
there
there's
with
too much of
Alana.
that already in me,
Hmm.
and I already have a West Indian family, and I don't need more of it.
Hmm.
So I just that's a no.
Yeah. I feel
Um,
the same. And it's not in a bad way. Like I feel the same. I'm like,
no,
there's already enough West Indian here. Can I go like be
yeah,
with someone who's a different culture so they could learn about
yeah,
my West Indianness and
yeah,
I can learn about
yeah,
their culture?
yeah.
That's how I see
Have
it.
I ever been attracted to a West Indian? Of course,
I know,
of
like
course. But growing up
I'd
now,
be
I'm
we
mad
have
like,
if you weren't.
we we're the best. We're simply the best group
I
of
feel
people.
yeah,
I feel like and this is just my bias or unconscious bias. I feel like when people say, I would never date another West Indian, or even scrolling through TikTok, there's like these
Jamaicans.
videos about name a group of like men you wouldn't date, and like girls just go off, especially when it's like West Indian men, and I'm like, what do
or
you
African
do?
men.
Yeah, it's like African men or West Indian men are the
S-
one in the same, they
So
would
there's
say.
there's different. Well, no, because for
Yeah.
African men, the thing for me is like the patriarchal kind of society thing that they've adopted. The ones that are, let's say, fresh, right? Not been in Canada for a while. I actually don't know anymore because I don't even live in multicultural spaces anymore. I don't know. Maybe in Scarborough, because in when I was in Scarborough, anybody, whatever. But then as you get older, but like I already have a West Indian mom. I
Oh,
don't need a
so
mother-in-law,
you
like a
did
West
like
Indian
what Sierra
mother-in-law.
said and leveled up? Is that it? Did you level up? Because I felt
Like
like when you
I
left
Ooh.
Scarborough, you leveled up. Did you level up?
no, I love Scarborough. What do you mean?
Yeah,
Scarborough is a level.
when you left Scarborough, right? You said like when it was Scarborough it was like anyone, but like when you left, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna take
No,
up.
it's that there were slim pickings outside of Scarborough,
Wow.
and
Um.
mostly of the Caucasian, variety. So,
Variety.
so
Wow.
it was. No, seriously, like Montreal. What choices did I have?
Arabic, people from the Middle East,
Like Lebanese?
people from the
Nah,
Middle East.
no, no.
Wow,
Well,
guys.
I know I dated a Russian for 2 years, so there was that. But yeah, no. In terms of black guys, once again, like I love black men, but like I just wasn't interested in the types available where I was. So
We'd have to go to the motherland and like
You,
select them and like come back, I feel.
I'm not sure if this is a conscious bias or an unconscious bias because we're getting a lot, and I feel like if I allow this to go on any further, you're going to talk your business, and you're going to mock yourself.
I am an open book.
So I, I love that we brought up dating and all that when it came to unconscious bias, but something that was brought to my attention very recently was even how we have conversations or write think pieces also include some level of unconscious bias. For example, even the word expat. If you go through enough websites, enough readings online, you will actually see that expats it's usually applicable to someone who is not a person of color or a person who is not BIPOC. But if you were to look up the word expat, it's applicable to everyone. How is that a thing? How is it that expat is only applicable to people of a certain heritage and not applicable to anyone who
You mean
leaves
white
it?
people?
Yes. Yes. How is it only applicable to white people when anybody else travels from their country to the next country for work, for school, to live?
Because they don't want to be called settlers and colonizers.
Thank you.
Hmm. So it's just being politically. So why is it that we don't get the name expat?
Because white people establish themselves as the status quo, and we
Hmm.
adhere to that every day
That part.
by allowing them to use the word. So yeah,
Interesting.
you can definitely affirm, You can definitely challenge the status quo by calling them settlers or colonizers where they are, or, because, I mean, white people can be immigrants or call them an immigrant if they're an
Yeah.
immigrant, right?
But I
A
feel
lot of
like we
people
don't
forget
use
that.
that word. We don't use that word when we refer to people of European descent, which I didn't
But they
really
are,
think
right?
about.
They are.
They are like technically they are, but expat just seems like a better term when you look at like writings like, oh, you automatically assume that they immigrated to this country not for a better life but because they had the means to do so. And that's usually the argument for expat from what I've read. It's that, okay, Europeans move into another country, they usually have the means to do so. They're not necessarily running from war or famine, or they're not trying to find jobs. They're legitimately just relocating to another place because they have the means, in comparison to the primitive belief that all people of color are running away from something, which is why
And
they're now in
who do you
someone
think
else's
created
country.
that term expat?
Exactly.
No clue. Educate me.
Hmm.
That's why you're here. Educate me.
Guaranteed the white person insecure about why they had to move to another country.
Hmm.
Interesting. Interesting. I would love to hear what people say in the comments. Just with this particular
Good
word.
luck, people. Good luck.
That's
I don't know
interesting.
what.
Guys, well, let me not say guys, but folks, let me know what you think about even verbiage as it pertains to uh there I'm losing my train of thought. Even when it pertains to
Expat
unconscious
versus
bias.
immigrant.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah, like
There's
why.
something though, there's another distinction I want to make because,
Mm-hmm.
we say white people, and yes, white people, it's true. But there's also a difference because a lot of white people get fragile, and they're like, well, it's not all white people and we're not all bad and you just hate on us. My own significant other gets like that sometimes, and I'm like, ugh. And then I realized, there's a difference between when we say white people and when you're talking about whiteness, and
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
whiteness as the thing, establishing the status quo as whiteness, and whiteness as the thing that we need to get away from as society, versus white people who are just another set of people,
I think I
Interesting.
hear it
right?
a lot from white people who are coming from European countries who were not associated with what went down in North America.
Mhm.
I use North America as an example because we know colonization
Mhm.
happened all over the world, but
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
um, the ones who moved here and now are grouped with the rest of those white people, there I've heard a lot from them who they'll say it's not all white people. Like, I'm not a part of that. Like, my ancestors had nothing to
Mhm.
do with that, and here I am being classified as a bad white person. Like, I don't condone what they're doing either. So like you
Mhm.
do hear it a lot from them where it's like, stop saying all white people. It's not all white people.
But do you feel it's an unconscious bias when we generalize? Because there are people who they will just use that. They will throw it around because they, whether or not they want to accept it, they feel a particular way, as it pertains to whiteness.
I think I don't know if it's necessarily unconscious bias. I think it's just more so generalization because it's also how like a lot of people generalize that every black person that's on this planet is a descendant of a slave,
I mean,
right?
I think
That
that
don't
makes
make no
sense.
sense.
And so there's that generalization where it's like every black person is formerly a slave. Oh, they have it hard because like they were once a part of slave. So it does like there's that like is that generalization? Is that unconscious bias? What is that?
Mhm.
Right? So
Okay, but how do we? And I want to open this up to both women on the panel today. How do we change some of the biases that we have, whether conscious or unconscious, as it pertains to people in general?
Within yourself.
Yeah, like what's the work that needs to be done, and then the work that needs to be done as a wider society.
I think that's so simple. But I'll let Alana go first.
um, well, for me, I think a big thing is establishing your positioning in society, is
Mm.
what I've been harping on and repeating, to people. How you are positioned vis-a-vis the rest of society, what are your privileges, There's a document called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh, and it's literally a list of different types of privileges. I can go to a store without being followed. I can blah, blah, blah. And so you could use that list to think about what your privileges are. Everybody has some, you know, what your experience, you have to literally reflect on your experience and see where you are positioned in society. By seeing where you are positioned in society, it changes a lot of your perspective. Then there's unlearning. So, unlearning a lot of the colonial structures that we were taught, and starting to live life through a decolonized lens. So, what was a structure that you were taught that was supposed to be there by a majority trying to establish a status quo in power versus what actually is?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Um, I love the readings that you provided.
Yes.
Definitely we will try to put a link in the description below. Shads, you're up. How can we unlearn, unpack, fix the unconscious biases that we have, or how do we do that?
Well, of course, I loved everything Alana said. I will only be like matching some of that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's the hum of it all is the systems that are in place by the people who have created them. They need to do more to break those down. Yes, of course, each and every one of us, we do have our unconscious biases, so we have to do that work to educate ourselves on that. Like, Google's free, libraries are still a thing, you could still go in
Are
there.
they in
Yes,
the
they very much are.
panoramic?
Yes, they very much are in
Mm-hmm.
the panoramic. They're essential
Okay.
services. You can simply reach out to people who don't look like you, ask questions. Don't bombard them with questions, because it's like, okay, they're not supposed to be doing the work for you either. And just simply like understanding other people. Because, like, what we notice in society is like, of course, naturally, we all tend to want to be around people who look like us. But how does that help to break down barriers if we are not mingling with people who don't look like us? Because, like, if I moved here and said I'm only going to stick around with Jamaicans, then I wouldn't be able to know about other people's cultures and their
Mm-hmm.
religions and their practices and just how they view things, and they wouldn't know about me, and just like break down any biases that they had about my people and
Very
stuff
true.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot that like individuals can do.
Mm-hmm.
Read, ask questions, and at the end of the day, it still really isn't the onus still isn't on people of color and black or indigenous people, because we did not create race, we did not
Mm-hmm.
create the systems that are in place.
Mm-hmm.
The white people, the white man created those things, and they
I feel
need
like you're like I'm doing this because it feels like you're reaching for patriarchy, like you're reaching to pull patriarchy, and like,
they are holding on to it, and they could see that that power that they have is slipping away, and they don't
hmm,
like it. And I just find it interesting, because it's like, what are you so afraid of? Why are you so afraid to share, to allow everyone to be at that same level, to grow, because you don't like what you've done. So you think that we're going to do to you what you've done to us for years. And that's not the case. We just want you to fix the damages that you've done.
I love that. I
Another thing
love
is just comfort.
I love that.
Yeah.
People seek comfort.
Yeah.
Shads, that was, I mean, that was a read. That was a read. I like that. I like
Mm-hmm.
that. Look,
And
look
I was
at
being
you. Look at
nice.
you hyping. That was a read. Which you brought up something about having conversations, which brings us to allyship. Now, we've been hearing that term like maybe for a year. Like allyship becomes the buzzword. Like everybody, I'm an ally. I think before people use ally when they spoke about the LGBTQIA. If I'm missing a letter, I apologize profusely.
You forgot
Um
plus. That will cover
plus
you.
okay. Sorry.
And the
Uh
two.
and two.
But
Two
And
spirited. How
two.
dare you forget two spirited?
Uh, you're badgering me. um but we've like that was usually when everybody's like, "Oh, I'm an ally, I'm an ally, and I'm an ally." But very recently, I learned that allyship is not something that you could self-assign, which is interesting. I thought you could say, you know what, I am an ally to indigenous people. I'm an ally to the Asian community. Apparently, if no one tells me that I'm an ally, then I'm just somebody running up my mouth. So, Alana, please
Yeah.
explain to people what allyship is, how one becomes an ally, because I feel like I've been self-identifying as an ally for years, and now that that has been taken away from me, I'm just gonna need a proper definition.
I self-identify as an ally.
All day,
So
every day.
ally,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, is not usually a noun, it's a verb. To ally yourself to somebody. Allyship is the noun. Um, so when people are like, I'm an ally, I'm an ally, well, first of all, who told you that, right? Did an oppressed person, did a marginalized person tell you that you were an ally?
Wow.
You just decided? What did you do
Allyship was given
to
away, and I took it.
did you take a university course and get a certificate?
Did you fill
Like
out the
what,
test?
who told you? What did you do? If you
Interesting.
want to ally yourself to somebody, you have to do things. And they
Mm-hmm.
have to tell you, wow, you are being a really good ally, or you are this is my ally.
Yeah.
You don't give yourself that name, because
Interesting.
if you're not the one, you're allying yourself to somebody who may be in a less advantageous situation than you, or might just be in another situation, right?
Right.
So, and I kind of think of it as a continual thing, right? Because it's a verb. You're continually seeking to ally yourself, to look for allyship. So, like, I might say I want to always be an ally to Indigenous people, but I'll never be like I'm an ally.
Mm.
No, you let other people call you an ally. You don't call yourself an ally,
Yeah.
because then
That
you are taking the space as well, and it's not
interesting.
about you.
Exactly.
Interesting. I
You're
bet
doing
a
the
lot of
savior
people didn't know
complex.
that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people didn't know that. No, I feel like when as it pertains to allies and allyship, um, when we talk about it, right, and who can be an ally and how allyship or the term allies is doled out, um, we talk about, you said something about it's not just showing up once, it's trying to continuously be a part of the process or trying to achieve change.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that being said, how does one differentiate between performative allyship and what is genuine allyship? Because performative allyship is this term that we start to hear
Mm-hmm.
since the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement, where people were just showing up to these protests to take Insta pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there, and that's it. Or I post a black square on
Mm-hmm.
Blackout
Ooh,
Tuesday,
child.
and I've officially been branded an ally.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I put the hashtag BLM in my Insta bio.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do we differentiate between performative allyship and
Mm-hmm.
genuine allyship? Because
Mm-hmm.
Shad said, you can, try to talk to someone of a different race, to get, not race, but culture, to get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to me, if someone came up to me, it's like, "Hi, so you're Jamaican? Tell me everything about Jamaica." I feel that's so performative.
Sounds
So
Mm-hmm.
explain to me the
yes.
difference between performative and genuine allyship.
Because performative allyship benefits the person performing.
Exactly.
They are not seeking to benefit the person they are allying with. They're seeking to benefit themselves. So if they're asking you, tell me about Jamaica, da 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 da, because they want to make themselves feel better in that moment by
Hmm.
seeking to
Mm,
have some knowledge. You're posting a black square. Well, you're posting a black square because what if you don't? What if people see that you don't? Right? Also,
mm,
learning all these terms and stuff like that. Yes, it's great, but you know, George Floyd wasn't the first one. It was the
Exactly.
first one that everybody saw at that level, right?
Yeah. And I
But
felt
there
it
interesting.
were
was because
many
of the
before.
pandemic.
Exactly. And there were many before in the States and in Canada,
Hmm.
right? We just don't talk about them. The
Hmm.
Colton Bushies, Joyce Echaquan,
Yeah.
a lot of different other people. So, and these terms, performative allyship, all of these things existed before George Floyd. It's just now There's that hype around them. And social media does make it easier for information to be, a lot of race scholars and people are seeing, scholars are seeing that if you put information on social media, this generation absorbs the information better that way. So
Yeah.
that's a great thing. But it all existed before. So performative allies are probably the ones running to try to make things right now out of fear or whatever. The way you distinguish is you think about who does it benefit.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Now, I love that. Just the way you explained that, because to me, performative allyship meant something totally different. So,
Mm.
Shads, tell me what you're thinking when as it pertains to performative allyship.
I'm supposed to follow up that?
Of
Really?
course. You know what? I'm saying women power. I'ma say black girl magic. I'ma use all of these hashtags because we're having a real conversation, and I love it. A lot of you gave a read. She's dropping knowledge. So, what does performative allyship look like to you? Like during the last year or so, um, did you see any performative allyship? Like, were there people who, okay, yeah, I'm going to post this square, I'm gonna do the hashtags, I'm gonna do the videos, I'm gonna do all that work, and then 2021 rolls around and crickets.
Crickets.
Yeah.
Thankfully, the people who are in my spaces didn't have to wait for what happened last year to suddenly care about people who didn't look like them. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't use them as an example, but I have seen there are people who are still posting, who are still educating people about what's happening with Indigenous people, what's happening with Black people to this day. So it wasn't just a simple square. Some of them actually weren't even a fan of the square because they're like, that's a joke in itself. Because, yeah. But what I see from other people, it's definitely performative where you're doing it for clout. You're doing it because it's like a trend almost. They
Mm.
basically turned a serious movement into a trend. They've
Mm-hmm.
made it look as if they've set it up where it's transactional now, because especially with what's happening with and I'm not going to say Asians because it's really East Asians who are suffering from
Mm-hmm.
this. What's happening with East Asians, there's been a lot of talk like, we were there for you during the Black Lives Movement, so you guys need to
Right.
be there for us during this. So there's that transactional mentality where it's like, no, that's not how it works, and you're pointing your fingers at the people that you shouldn't be. That's not to say that there aren't people in the Black community who have not been participating in these attacks, and that's no thanks to the white supremacy belief that's been placed on each and every
Fams, the
one of
people
us.
them is going to say, oh, you're blaming the
That
people them for everything.
But let's be honest, it is white supremacy that's at the hum of it all. Like, we're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
be pointing our finger at white supremacy, and they've set it up where we're pointing our fingers at everyone except who it should be. But they're pointing the
Mm-hmm.
Right.
gun at us, literally and figuratively, all of us but
Mm.
them. So it's like oh, I'm gonna be a good person. So going back to, like, again, performative, it's like, I'm going to be a good person, I'm on the right side, they're just showing face, it's just for clout.
Interesting. I love that, I love the way Alana did her definition and she brought everything full circle. But because you're like this social media, and I want to call you a social media guru right now, it's
Mm-hmm.
funny that you brought that back to say, performative allyship is for clout, because I never thought about it from that perspective, that everybody is suddenly an ally because it looks good, right? It's interesting because, like, I would have never thought, like, I thought you could either be an ally or you're not an ally. For me, performative is just, yo, I'm doing this just because I don't want to piss people off. I like that's how I see it. Like, let me just do this. Let me have a couple of meetings. Let me talk to the people of color. And we're not really going to do anything, but they got to speak. So they're heard, right? Okay, let's tick that box. To me, that is performative allyship. So I love that all three of us had like a different perspective of what that looked like. So, so thank you. Now, we're about to wrap up because we can't talk about performative allyship and people of color and diversity and inclusion for the rest of our lives. So, I want to leave on a positive note, right? I want to leave on a positive note. So, Alana, you're the guest.
Hmm.
What do you want people to learn to take away from the conversation that we've had today?
Oh, um, do your homework and do it for you. I think, you know, we all talk about since March, and I
Mm-hmm.
think because March is one of those turning points,
Right.
decisional points in history for a lot of people. You have to decide whether you're going to be anti-racist, decide whether you're going to take this path of, decolonizing your mind and doing all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a decision that people have to make. So I think probably the thing I would say is look inside you. Take some time and look inside you and think about who do you want to be and how do you want, what kind of little impact, what is your drop in the ocean? What little impact do you want to have on society? How do you want to be towards society?
Mm.
And decide that and then start looking on social media, whatever it is, but do your little part to get your mind there. Don't rely on other people to do it for you, and
Mhm.
have courage to speak up even if it's hard, because it's always hard.
Yeah,
I
this
like
is no
that.
easy
No.
task.
So,
No.
Shads, you gave a read. I mean, you were on fire today. I felt like this was one of your power topics.
I was being super
So
mild too. Like I'm being nice.
so I mean, Alana is radical. Like she was say it as it is. Um,
I don't know how to not.
I know. I mean, the viewers and the listeners won't know, but I know. No, Shads, I want you to tell me what we got from this conversation because when Alana was speaking earlier, I was almost, I want to say 50% sure that you were tearing up inside because you know it was emotional for you to have this conversation. So you took something from what Alana said and you took something from the conversation that we've had today. But what would you like people to know?
Well, I was holding back when Alana was speaking on Indigenous matters because I know about what's been and continues to happen with them, and I'm not going to label myself as an ally because I have not been gifted with that title, but I have been doing my part, and I'm just going to say land back. And if you don't know what that means, do your research and follow indigenous people. Do your research on it and understand that they're not out there protesting and blocking railroads because they feel like doing it just for ish and giggles. They're doing it because treaties have been broken, ownerships of land have been taken wrongfully, and
Right.
so I'm just going to put that out there. So yes, I was holding back tears because what they've been going through and continue to go through even as we're speaking right now is very very frustrating and very disheartening. And as someone who is an immigrant to this country, who is in a better position than they are, even as something as simple as water in a first world country, in a country that has one of the most freshwater
The
access,
largest.
the largest next to Brazil. It's
Mm.
like, to me, it's like if something as simple as that doesn't flip the switch in all Canadians' head, like that's not okay, then I don't know what. So I'm not doing a takeaway. I'm just adding. That's my takeaway. I'm adding. So people who listen to this, please go and do your research on what's happening with Indigenous people in Canada, because yes, Black people here, we have our issues, but in Canada, Indigenous people are treated like dirt. Like, people literally think that they don't even exist. People in Canada who come to this country don't even know that Indigenous people are still here. No, they did not kill them all off. Thank God.
Hmm.
They're out there and they're fighting, and they're actually doing it for you too.
Mhm.
Because if it weren't for them, we would not have fresh water. We would not have clean air if we just let the people who are currently running things just have their way. So I'm trying to not like get too emotional again right now, cause but
I'm
but
I'm
that's my
gonna cut you
takeaway.
there.
That's my
I'm
takeaway.
gonna cut you there because it seems rough. If I should take away anything from this conversation, it's the fact that there's so many things that we need to learn and we need to unlearn. And I think that's important for everyone, regardless of race, culture, nationality, creed, um, gender, however you identify. I think it's important essentially to educate yourself. I feel like sometimes we feel we're above being educated, or we're supposed to be educated by the people who are either being oppressed or the people who are the people of the weak, so to speak. So it's good that we were able to have this conversation to educate people, but also to inform them that a lot of the things that we thought were okay before, they're not, and that the greater conversation starts with self.
Yep.
So la- ladies, women, thank you so much for this. It meant a lot. I know that it was heavy, but
But
thank you for being here,
necessary.
and thank you,
Mhm.
thank you for being here, and thank you, Alana, for making the time for us.
Thank you for
um
having me.
No, Alana, I'm not sure if you're the social media type, but do you have socials, and where can people find you or follow your work?
So, my handle is at lanny.d.
Hmm.
That's my Instagram handle, and now that I think of it, I should have probably made my Twitter handle the same thing. I only got Twitter a couple months ago, and it was mostly to follow Black Twitter and laugh. But I
I
occasionally post the
I'm
out
with
of
you.
order tweet. Uh, so that handle is at Alana Undefined.
Wow,
Uh,
I like
yeah,
that
wow.
one.
I
yeah.
love
Maybe
that.
I
I
should
love.
change my Insta handle to that. I'll
Yeah.
do that.
Wow,
Okay.
wow. I love that. So, guys, we try to put everybody's instas and socials. Shads. No, I know the last time when we ended the show, we didn't speak about your socials, but you're actually a photographer. So, where can people find you?
At THE photography underscore. It's just that simple, which the THE mean through her eyes. So
Ooh.
That is so deep, but again,
Can you put
thank.
that on like a crew neck for me?
will do,
Guys, that's
will
a
do.
backstage thing. That's a backstage thing. Well, thank you for being here. And until next time, walk good.